Welcome to the Data Asset Weekly Dispatch video series. In this series, we bring to you some important stories about data assets and how they're impacting our world. Each week we try and cover 5 or 6 major stories that have happened over the last week, and we bring to you certain important and salient points about them. This week we cover some really interesting topics. So we cover one story, and I'm going to be referring to my notes as always as I go through these stories. The first story is about artificial intelligence being used to diagnose coronavirus, followed by how Google is tracking location data to understand social distancing, unemployment in the US, followed by how hedge funds are using alternative data, and finally ending with a very interesting story on how data is being, in a sense, kidnapped and held for ransom, and how there are organizations and institutions and people out there who are helping companies during this time. So let's start. Our first story is about artificial intelligence and how it is being used to diagnose coronavirus. Now, there are tests for coronavirus called the RT-PCR, but they're very difficult to get. They're not, they're really not in supply. So one of the alternatives, cheaper, faster alternative to this, is to really look at CT scans and X-rays. And so medical practitioners and radiologists are in high demand when it comes to quickly determining whether or not a person seems to have coronavirus or not. Now, artificial intelligence is being deployed to be able to quickly determine, by looking at those CT scans and those X-rays, on whether or not a person seems to have those symptoms. The problem is, which is discussed in this article, is that there's just not enough data. There's not enough labeling. There's not enough background information available for the system to be taught. Now, why does the system have to be taught? It needs to be taught because this artificial intelligence solution uses something called neural networks, and neural networks is a way of assessing a problem of input and output by using really a model which is like the human brain, the neural networks in the human brain. Now, for that, you need a lot of data on which a model has to be trained so that it can accurately predict when it sees a new CT scan or an X-ray. That's been a problem. And this is also the reason why, though you will have lots of private players and even universities creating these solutions. So you've got, for example, in India, you've got Cure AI, and then you've got in Canada, you've got Darwin AI, and you've got a whole host of other private players and even universities who are trying to build solutions around it. The issue is really the lack of data. There are reports that this has been deployed successfully in China, but really when you look at the reality, that may not always be true. And so that's our first story. It just goes on to show you that while artificial intelligence has a lot of possibilities, when it comes to lack of access of data or good quality data, that's when these solutions sort of stop delivering to the level that we want them to. And that's our story number 1. The second story that we cover this week is about Google and its local data social distancing initiative. So what they've really gone ahead and done is that using an opt-in feature, they're aggregating and anonymizing data that they're collecting from various individuals, people like you and me, to try and figure out which areas, which public parks, which hospitals, which supermarkets are crowded or not, and therefore to see where is it that people are managing these social distancing norms very well. This is very similar to a story that we did the last week. The only difference is that in this case, this data is actually viewable and usable by people, anyone, and it's being done in cooperation with health officials. They're currently covering this data for about 131 countries. Governments are really keeping a track by using this kind of data. So for example, you could look at the map of US and see, based on the color and the depth of that map, where is it that social distancing norms are being followed or not. And so that's kind of interesting. And similarly, other organizations like Facebook have also initiated such programs where they're using data for many of these initiatives, and that's kind of interesting. The only issue here is that privacy norms are still sort of murky, not for Google but across the board. And the other big problem is that there are specific concerns about, can we do contact tracing? Can we go down to the last level of which is the person who may have been impacted by this? And so there are many questions around that, and I think it's a good story, it's a good initiative, but we need to see how this develops. Our third story is from Vox, and it covers unemployment in the US. There are about 6 graphs that they've showcased to kind of give you an overview of the staggering impact that coronavirus has had on unemployment. There are a few figures here that I'd like to read out for you that will give you some context to this. So in 2011, unemployment was at about 9%. And in fact, just in Jan this year, unemployment was down to 4%. In October last year, it was 3.6%. So at that rate, the US had seen one of its lowest unemployment rates in over 50 years. What that meant was that long-term unemployed people in the US were only about 1.3 million or so. Just in the last 2 weeks, the total number of people who have applied for unemployment benefits has gone up by about 10 million. And so what they're saying is right now is that this number could go up to 47 million. I mean, the estimates vary between 22 to 47 million. At 47 million, this would make unemployment at about 32%. During the Great Depression, it was at 25%. And so this has really meant that a number of other factors are also getting impacted. For example, job postings has seen one of its biggest dips just in the last 1 month. The number of organizations that are now working from home because of impacts of COVID has shot up, as you'll see in one of the graphs. And there are many other things that are very striking when you look at it visually. And I think this is what that story kind of covers. Our fourth story is about a hedge fund in Singapore called Diamond Asia Capital, and how they've used alternative data, or what we call a non-regular, non-financial data, to kind of take macro bets on the market. So they used, data from past outbreaks, Google searches, test kit availability for coronavirus, road congestion, to try and take a position on the market wherein they believed that the market would go down. And because of that short position that they took, their main fund is up 40% this year, just by the use of the right kind of data. Now, this is very important because what that means is that data sets like, how many ships are there in a dock, how many ships are moving around the world, what is the flight path of private jets, how many jets are there currently flying, how much road congestion is there at present. Those kind of data sets have become very, very important. And I think, inputs such as internet consumption have just over the last couple of months shown where the impact of coronavirus is having a more negative impact than other places when it comes to work. And I think hedge funds and other institutions and investors and insurance companies, and increasingly now normal businesses, are also going to be using these data sets to make decisions and make bets on the future. And that's our fourth story. Our fifth story is actually a very interesting story. It's about hackers kidnapping data and then asking you for ransom. This is something that's happened over the last few years with the number of data breaches shooting up through the roof. And by some estimates, the number of data breaches year on year have gone up by about 67 to 70%. This is very interesting because what that has meant is that there are intermediaries like lawyers and forensic experts and computer experts and normal investigators who have now become people or data breach coaches who are helping these organizations in figuring out what to do once a data breach occurs. Because what that means is that decisions such as what kind of PR to be done, what kind of policies to be done, what kind of people to be brought in, all those things need to be planned by somebody who has managed the situation before. And because it can be a very stressful time, you see this new type of almost professional come in such situations, such very stressful situations. And so we've actually seen this happen now a lot, where medical facilities and hospitals and labs have started getting targeted by criminals, to try and take their data away by hacking, or just by putting in malware. So I think this is a very interesting story, because it tells you where the world is moving toward, and where the world is definitely moving towards is that while physical crime may have reduced thanks to coronavirus, this crime is definitely going to increase, and so we'll need far more of such individuals and such skill sets. That's our fifth story. That's it for this week. We had 5 very interesting stories as a part of this week's Data Asset Weekly Dispatch newsletter and video series. As always, we would request you to please like, share, subscribe this channel, and also follow us on social media, because we push out a lot of content, we push out a lot of insights and a lot of details focused on data assets and how that impacts our world. We'd love to hear from you. Please leave comments, please reach out to us, and until next week, take care.